Yeah, my name is More Blessings Fidause. I work for the Norwegian Church Aid. I'm the country manager for Norwegian Church Aid. I'm based in Pretoria. I will moderate the session. We work in Norwegian Church Aid and its partners. We work closely with Southern Africa Resource Watch on many different things. You're very welcome to this session. On the logistics side, you will all be muted unless you are speaking. We will have the presentations, and then of course, if you want to speak, then you will raise your hand and we'll recognize you as such. Only when you are speaking will you be unmuted by our IT guru. So yeah, I start, is that okay? Somebody? Okay, it's so quiet. I actually feel like, yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, we can start. Welcome, a very big welcome to you to this meeting organized by Southern Africa Resource Watch. And the topic of our discussion is development finance for community justice and environment defenders by the mining sector in Southern Africa. This is a very timely discussion that comes in the context of trying to advance initiatives that present a case for the mining companies to play a more active role, to play a bigger role in terms of supporting development initiatives that promote work around human rights issues in mining communities. Of course, the broader development agenda, but with a specific focus on the rights discourse. And this discussion comes in the context of the growing UN business and human rights agenda, which is a global agenda actually that is trying to push more responsible operations by international companies, paying more attention to the issues of human rights abuses that are so rampant across the globe. This initiative focuses particularly on some of the three pillars of the UN business and human rights agenda. The three pillars are the state. One focuses on the state and its duty to protect human rights. The second one focuses on corporate responsibility to respect human rights and access to effective remedy. And this particular initiatives focuses a bit more on the second and the third pillars. The discussion on how mining companies can play a bigger role has been going on for a long time. And we do recognize that there are some companies actually out there that are trying to do good, that are going out of their way to engage communities, to come up with initiatives that can actually advance the cause for supporting community initiatives to defend the rights of the communities and defenders. But we also do realize that there's quite a lot of companies that are not out there even taking the initiative to do that. And what we want to do with this study is to bring out case studies from where other companies, where governments, where communities can learn. And then we say these are best practices that we can use moving forward to involve more companies across the Southern Africa region and of course across the African continent and globally to take a more effective role, to provide more finances for development, for community justice and environmental defenders. This is a study which is ongoing. I will give Veronica the opportunity to give us more finer details about the study, but please note that the point of this meeting is to present the initial findings and engage a discussion, an open and honest discussion, give feedback to the researchers so that our study can actually be strengthened moving forward. It's not a final study, so this is part of a process to get a good study that we can use at different levels. So with that, I will give, before giving the researchers an opportunity to present their findings, I'll give Veronica Zano, who is the Governance and Research Policy Officer for Southern Africa Resource Watch, to give us more information on the background as we start our meeting. Veronica, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, more blessings. Before I come in to give the background, may I please ask Claude, our Executive Director, to just also share some remarks pertaining to this meeting. Apologies for this.
Claude, can you switch your camera on and unmute yourself? Or the facilitator?
Yes, no. Thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica. I just thought that, let me say good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending from where you are joining us from. And my role is really to welcome you to this exciting discussion that the Southern Africa Resource Watch is organizing today on the theme development financing for business to promote human rights and community participation in Southern Africa. I think the discussion today fit well into our mandate. SARWA's mandate is to promote good governance in the extractive industries by putting a spotlight on the specific dynamics of natural resources in Southern Africa, building a distinctive understanding of dynamics around extractive of resource and how it is impacting on people, on environment, on economy. In doing this work, we put a special focus on the relationship between resource extraction activities and human rights as they are obtained on the ground, and develop advocacy efforts to engage this reality. But also we try to propose alternative way to deal with these realities. The fundamental question that we've been asking ourselves in recent times, which led to the work that my colleague Veronica is leading, is the following. Is it possible for mining companies to work with communities and human rights defenders to resolve problems that might occur because of mining activities? And we know mining brings a lot of positive impact in terms of economies, employment, but also create a lot of problems in terms of pollution, displacement, and many other problems. And we thought that, considering the tension that has always existed, is it possible to find a new model where communities and companies work together to resolve some of this, and human rights defenders work to resolve some of these problems? Because what we've seen before, it's more a tension between these actors. So for us, with COVID today, which poses a serious threat to lives, especially for mining communities, it has also raised questions. How can we build better going forward in terms of positioning extractive industries, mining activities to respond to the challenges that communities are facing? So this is the type of discussion that we are going to go in to say what type of model is emerging for this type of constructive engagement between companies and mining communities and human rights defenders. I think the best person to speak more about it is Veronica, who gave me the floor. Veronique, I think for me, it was just to say welcome and say we are in a difficult period, challenged by COVID, and we need to find ways to work much better going forward. And this research gives us an opportunity to think afresh on how we can engage stakeholders in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claude. So I'll take it on from here. And thank you so much, Madam Facilitator, for really setting this tone and also really giving the broader context of the discourse on which this meeting and this project is centered. So if you may allow me to share the screen with regards to a short presentation that I have just prepared for this meeting to give a background of the project. So More Blessings and Claude did a gave a very elaborate context setting in terms of what has aided and where we're coming from in terms of the discourse on furthering issues of business and human rights within the extractive industry. And in this particular incident, we are looking more towards the mining sector. We do know that the extractive industry mainly is made up of oil, gas, and minerals. And as alluded to by Claude, the background, my role is just to give a background in terms of what really aided or that really helped us is SARWA with some of our development partners in the conceptualization of such a project, which still has room to be improved. And I think that's the reason why we also have this very important meeting, so that we believe that this project is solely dependent by the role that different stakeholders that have a key role in promoting business and human rights should come together continuously and share ideas, and also to track some of the new emerging models that are already in existence. So we do understand that we do actually know that the extractive industry plays a very key economic role in terms of the growth of national economies within the SADC region. And as a regional bloc, the majority of the country, or mainly on extractive industry. And when we look at the extractive industry, it has really contributed to the building of national economies. We do have a legacy of countries such as South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the DRC having been really, being born. But we do also are also cognizant of the fact that the mining industry in the region also has serious legacy issues that have characterized it, particularly the destruction to the environment by some of these mining operations based on some of the unsustainable mining practices. And this really has presented a lot of challenges, especially to the relationship between adjacent communities and the mining sector. And over the years, civil society has also come into play a role of really monitoring some of these operations based on the concerns from the mining communities. And because of this very much concern, there's been a recognition that extractive industry or projects really now cannot continue to do business as usual. And what is also being acknowledged even by the industry themselves is that for mining projects to be sustainable, there needs to be secured and beneficial ownership and a strong win-win relationship by those affected by the projects themselves, through also working together with the mining companies to identify and to find a mechanism of mitigating on some of those risks, as well as capitalizing on those opportunities that come from the mining sector. And with that, it is interesting and also commendable that there's a new view that has also emerged from this discourse, that business can and should be a larger in social and environmental human bodies such as the development of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which more blessings alluded to. We have also seen financial institutions and even industry itself, the mining industry bodies, really placing human rights higher on the business agenda. And key to this whole business and human rights agenda is the principle of community consultation and participation in all the processes of the mining project cycle. We are happy to have the Africa Development Bank and also some of those industry bodies also really coming and sharing how, for example, how financial institutions are also now even requiring mining projects that are funded by them to ensure that the discourse of community participation is embedded within all the development projects that they are financing in a bid to ensure that the environment and social standards are met and mitigation risks are also advanced. And what is also commendable is that we have seen that SARWA and in the work that we're doing is that the Southern Africa Development Community, I think in all the countries, national laws and also regulations and also realize the importance of safeguarding human rights within mining processes. And we've seen a lot of this modeling mainly around issues of environmental impact assessments in countries like South Africa, where we have social and labor plans, which also really is a facet or a model that is anchored ensuring that communities do also really have some form of consultation. But what we are also saddened by this whole this national and legal framework discourse on community participation is that some of these laws are not very elaborate in terms of really setting out a detailed model and guidance on how this community participation and consultation should be done. And as such, we also see even limited institutional capacity to monitor these whole models or these frameworks related to community participation. But importantly, we are seeing that communities themselves, they are also really not even knowledgeable and appreciating those processes that are provided by the law, if at all, towards community participation. And we have seen even some mining companies, even though they might want to really conduct community participation processes, some of the social power dynamics within local communities really also pose as a threat in terms of really involving the communities. And as such, our thinking was that, as what Claude indicated, was that we need to find a way or a project that really kind of builds upon the existing work that has been done, particularly of diffusing the negative perceptions that have long marked mining projects in the region. As we are going to be sharing some of the findings, you know that there seems to be a perception or whereby, for example, local communities view mining companies as gross violate rights. And on the other hand, mining companies, they get a bit skeptical when we talk about issues of human rights. And they see communities and civil society as more of like they are mainly concerned on shaming their operations and not really acknowledging their positive contributions. And as such, we are saying within the project is this project is premised on advancing best practices of participation within the as more blessings alluded to, a lot of mining companies actually have taken a notch higher this principle of community participation and financing various development projects within the mining the local communities. But what is important is that we thought that it would be good for mining companies to learn and share from other pace setters within the sector, for them to be able to really see the value add in sharing issues of human rights, community participation within the various processes of the mining cycle, with a bid to ensure that there is a social license to operate. We do also acknowledge that some mining companies have also even established mechanisms to promote business and human rights and to place some form of dialogue between them and the mining communities to mitigate against some of those practices or operations that can do harm on their human rights. And as such, communities are establishing various redress mechanisms that can be accessible. In some areas, you have community and mining liaison communities. And these are some of the mechanisms in the existing platforms that we think that are important, and other companies can also, and communities can derive lessons and practices on them. And the project which we are discussing today is really founded on the realization that also a lot of foundations and governments that have provided donor financing towards the work of civil society and community-based organizations advancing environmental justice and human rights. These resources alone from these foundations and donor fund governments are not able to, on their own, to address the challenges. And as such, I think even some of the private sector themselves acknowledging that the private sector needs to take a much more important role in terms of solving these problems. And this can actually be also through tapping into their financial resources and expertise. So we're finding some new models or some mining companies actually embedding the issues of environmental and human rights justice as part of their role in terms of furthering their roles to business and human rights and ensuring that there's sustainability to their operations. And in so doing, we are saying under this project, we are trying to see, and we're actually championing that mining companies should be able to fund community-based groups and human rights defenders to also play a part in terms of monitoring the state and furthering issues of business and human rights in their operations. And we all know that there are some companies that are actually doing issues of environmental and social governance reporting, and such. It could be a mechanism where they could work together in terms of the reporting of such collaborative partnerships. The project is basically founded on two objectives: to promote business and human rights within the SADC's mining sector, like I mentioned, through best practice of effective and sustained community participation, to establish platforms for communities and the mining companies to build relationships and protection of human rights. And some of the activities that are being done under this project includes the research studies that have been done, which are going to be shared today by our researchers from the 5 countries, and looking at the select mining companies that were part of this important exercise. Let me also acknowledge and note that this project has really seen a very different dimension, and acknowledgement has to be extended to some of the mining companies that have really participated in these assessment studies by really availing themselves and being open and sharing key information or documents related to their companies. And in Zimbabwe, we have Caledonia and Zimasco, DRC, Tenke Fungurume, and Kamoa, Mozambique, Valley and Kenma, Zambia, Sanje, Iron Ore and Lafarge Cement, and in South Africa, Petra and Anglo America. And as such, the importance of such a research is to really not to critique or to shame, but is to also really acknowledge the good that is being derived by some of these companies, and to also find models of saying how do we try to sustain some of those practices and also strengthen some of those initiatives that are already in existence so that other companies within the region and communities to also learn. The project is also going to be able, after this, to provide technical assistance to the mining companies on developing and strengthening some of their business and human rights policies. So we are saying that civil society, we are under this project, we are going to be open to work with mining companies and going to reach out to those that are willing to also really extend a view, and also issues of capacity building. On that, I'll end here in terms of some of that brief background in terms of what we've done as a project. Thank you so much. Thanks, and apologies for taking a bit long.
Yes, Madam, you did take long, but we needed that context so that we have the details of the study. In case some of us have not looked into the concept note or the terms of reference. My take from both of you is that it is actually very possible, or it must be possible, and it should be possible for the mining companies to work together with the communities. I think the question that we need to be answering in this session is, how do we best come up with the model which is a win-win relationship for the companies and for the communities? And from what you are saying, Veronica, we have seen that there are examples of companies that you have listed that are actually ready to work, ready to avail themselves to do this. So in the spirit of the UN's Build Back Better agenda, how do we, mining companies and communities, work together to come up with a win-win solution and a win-win relationship as we seek to to increase development finance for promoting business and human rights. You were told that the study was carried out in 5 countries, and we have researchers that have worked with those in those 5 countries: Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, DRC, and South Africa. And they will be presenting the findings so far of the research. So I would like to call upon, just note that Patience is not here, Patience Nsingo, but Norman will do the presentation. So I've got Norman, Dimas, Jean-Pierre, and William to do the presentations. I'll give you 10 minutes each to make your presentations. So Norman, please, you can go ahead and start the presentation.
Thank you very much. More blessings. Just want to check if I can share my screen.
You okay, Norman?
Yes, I'm just sharing my screen, putting up the presentation.
Okay.
Kindly
you
let
can
me
see
know.
your screen, but the text is very small for those of us who have got more eyes than 2. I don't know if there's a way to increase at least the size.
Yes, let me see if I can. Was it in full screen mode when you were seeing the small text, or it was still in the editing
it's
mode?
much better now. It's much better
Okay.
now. For
All
those
right,
of us who are aging with our sight.
my apologies for that. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'll be, over the next 10 minutes, I'll be presenting on a study we conducted in Zimbabwe with the title Development Financing by Mining Companies to Promote Human Rights and Community Participation in Zimbabwe. I conducted the study with Mr. Patience Nsingo, who was supposed to make the presentation, but unfortunately couldn't make it today. As an overview, I will not be touching on the objectives of the study because these have been already discussed in depth by the presenters who have come before me. I'll start by speaking about the methodology we used in Zimbabwe. I'll talk about the companies that we covered, their policies and practices on business and human rights, the level of community participation and how it is financed. And then we'll speak about the grievance and redress mechanisms that we observed in Zimbabwe. Then lastly, we'll look at the lessons learned. So with respect to the methodology, we used qualitative research methods. So we used key information interviews. We had 5 of these. We shared qualitative questionnaires with the 2 companies that we covered. And then we also utilized focus group discussions, which were our major source of information from the community. We conducted a total of 3 focus group discussions in 2 districts of Zimbabwe with a total participation of 56. And this includes 2 traditional chiefs, 3 headmen, elected councillors, local government officials, a CEO for Community Share Ownership Trust, political party members, farmers, business people, health professionals, and ordinary community members. We also did literature review, and after all the data collection, we coded our data and analyzed it using MaxQDA. In terms of the limitations we faced, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has again been discussed in depth by the former presenters, prevented us from conducting some in-person meetings, which really affected the number of key information interviews we could have. And then the assessment focused on 2 companies in Zimbabwe: Zamasco, which is a chromium miner, and it has operations across the Great Dyke, which crosses the country from north to south. But we focused on its North Dyke operations in the Zimba district in Mashonaland West. And then we also covered Blanket Mine, which is a gold producer located in Gwanda district in Madebeleland South. So Masco is the largest chromium mine in Zimbabwe, and Blanket Mine is one of the largest gold producers in the country. The overviews of the companies themselves. Zamasco Private Limited is a vertically integrated Zimbabwean company And by that, I mean it produces the chromium ore, processes it, and exports ferrochrome mainly to China. It is wholly owned by Zamasco Holdings Private Limited, which I believe is registered in Mauritius, which is jointly owned by Sino-Steel Corporation and China Africa Development Fund. The two hold 73% of the company. They're the majority shareholder. And then this 27% is held by what we are advised are Zimbabwean entities without more further detail around the exact beneficial ownership there. Blanket Mine, 1983 Private Limited, is a Zimbabwean registered company whose shareholders are Caledonia Holdings, Zimbabwe Private Limited, which is an indirect subsidiary of Caledonia Mining Corporation and an international company, which holds 64% of the company. It's also 16% owned by the National Indigenization and Economic Empowerment Fund, which is a state-owned body that was set up as part of the indigenization drive in Zimbabwe. 10% is owned by Blanket Employee Trust Services, and another 10% is owned by the Gwanda Community Share Ownership Trust. We'll go further into these details later on in the presentation. Now, around Zamasco's policies and practices on business and human rights, Sino-Steel, the main shareholder, is a member of the China Chamber of Commerce of Metals and Minerals. And this chamber has committed to strictly observe the UN principles on business and human rights during the entire life cycle of the mining company. However, Zamasco is not observing these principles. This may be to do with the fact that companies that are producing chromium are not strictly required by the chamber to abide with this particular commitment because they're seen as low risk. Zamasco also has safety, health, and environmental policy, and it also conducts environmental impact assessments. And then around its community participation and financing, it engages with communities mainly through quarterly meetings that it holds with community leaders. So by community leaders, we mean councillors, village heads, headmen, the chief, and it also engages community members directly through public events. So sometimes they conduct health awareness programs and the like, and they use this platform to engage, share information in communities and also receive feedback. However, communities that are further away from Zamasco's North Dyke offices feel very disengaged from the company. So some people literally said, we don't know Zamasco, we see mining happening and some of it done by Zamasco, its tributors, but we don't even know the company, we've never seen it, never heard from it. But those communities that stay closer are more engaged and know a lot more about the company and have participated in various fora where the company is hosted. Zamasco seeks to achieve community participation largely through the issuance of contracts to locals. And I put this in quotes because this is a direct quote from Zamasco's management. And by contracts, they mean the issuance of mining sub-licenses in quotes to other entities so that they can do the mining and send the ore to Zamasco for processing. And Zamasco has 66 contractors in the North Dyke. 74% come from the community, 23% are Zimbabweans from other parts of the country, and 3% are foreigners. There's, however, a lack of clarity around who has the responsibility for environmental management. The company says one thing, the community members say another, and the tributors themselves contradict the company. And this is really at the heart of the significant level of environmental degradation and complaints around lack of proper environmental management that exist in Rimba district, not just about Zamasco's operations, but about all the chromium and other mineral production that is happening in the district. And unfortunately, we focus on Zamasco, so we're not trying to single out Zamasco in this particular district. And then Zamasco procures food, tire repair services and sign writing services from the community, and is also in the process of developing a supplier development program to increase local procurement. In terms of its grievance and redress mechanisms, it uses an anonymous tip-off system, and it allows for whistleblowing on unethical conduct by the company or its employees and contractors. It also uses the quarterly meetings with community leaders to discuss grievances, and the Zamasco's employees, because they also work and live in the community, they also use informal interactions to get information on grievances from the community. And then with respect to Blanket Mine and its main shareholder, Caledonia Mining Corporation, have and implement the following policies and practices on business and human rights. The first is Caledonia has an environmental, social, and governance board committee. It implements the quoted companies alliances 10 principles of corporate governance. It has a code of business conduct, ethics, and anti-bribery. And then Blanket Mine at the local level has a safety, health, and environmental policy, while Caledonia also has an overlying environmental policy. Caledonia is listed on the New York Stock Exchange and on the London Stock Exchange's alternative investment market.
Norman, can I interrupt for a second? Your presentation is not moving. The slides are not moving. Is that deliberate or?
So right now I am on a slide that is titled Blanket Mine's Policies and Practices.
Okay, because it hasn't moved from the first one.
Oh, okay. So that was not deliberate at all. Let me just zoom out a little bit. My apologies. All right, let me reshare. It tends to happen with Zoom on my machine.
Yeah, that's just a new reality. So while we are resharing, maybe your audience, your very big audience in this meeting might also want to see you.
Unfortunately, I cannot get out my video. I am in an very inconvenient space as I am actually on a work trip and had to jump in at the last minute. So very sincere apologies.
Fine, don't worry. You can peel your potatoes and still make the multitasking. It's fine. We are happy with that. But anyway, please share the presentation so that we follow it as we go.
Okay. So I don't know if people can now see the slides. I'm going to share in the edit mode because typically that works for me.
Yes, now, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the slide where I am at now. Caledonia, I was saying Caledonia is listed publicly on the New York Stock Exchange and on the Icmm market, and that falls under the London Stock Exchange. And both these exchanges call for ethical behavior by listed companies. So this is an additional requirement for ethical behavior for Blanket Mine. And then Blanket Mine around community participation and financing has a totally different model from what Zamasco uses. It holds a 10% shareholding in Blanket Mine. The community holds a 10% shareholding in Blanket Mine through the Gwanda Community Share Ownership Trust. This was established in 2012 at the height of the implementation of the indigenization policy. And in fact, Blanket Mine is the only mining company in Zimbabwe that ever fully indigenized, meaning it got to a point where it was truly owned 51% by indigenous Zimbabwean individuals and entities. So Caledonia actually donated the 10% shareholding to the community. It was not sort of prepaid, but was actually donated in full. And in addition to this donation of 10% of the company, Caledonia also made a $1 million non-refundable cash donation to the trust to ensure that it could be fully established and begin operating from day one before having to wait for any declaration of dividends. It also then paid $4 million in advanced dividends in 2012 and 2013, literally meaning before the 10% shareholding, which was donated, began earning dividends. The company actually advanced dividends of $4 million. And this allowed, what it did is allowed this share ownership trust to begin community development programs. And a key result of this was that if you look in 2013, Blanket Mine was spending about $2.1 million on corporate social responsibility. But because of this investment in the Gwanda Community Share Ownership Trust, between 2014 and 2019, so up to 2018, the company only spent 153,000 on CSR, because that is how just how active the community share ownership trust was. However, in 2019, due to monetary policy changes and erosion of value of the local currency, the amount of capital that the Gwanda community share ownership trust had was severely affected by inflation, and Blanket Mine had to stand in again through its CSR and spent $1.7 million in CSR in 2020. Right. Then around grievance and redress mechanisms, the community grievances are addressed to the human resources manager at Blanket Mine and the CSR officer, and communities can also engage directly with the mine manager or general manager if they feel the grievances have not been addressed well by these officers. The community approaches the mine using elected councillors or traditional leaders, or even entity heads if it's coming from particular companies or small business groups. The local chief sits on the board of Blanket Mine, and this plays a key intermediary role between the company and the community. And lastly, the management noted that the relationship with the community has improved over time as each party gets to understand more of the other's expectations and capabilities. Now, the lessons learned from this assessment of these companies, and before I get into this, I think you might have seen the word human rights defenders is missing all across this presentation. And this speaks to, firstly, as we're speaking to the communities and the mines, there is a clear lack of participation of human rights defenders around the grievances and challenges faced by the companies. In Zimba district, which is not just for the mining area, but for all NGO activity, is a very notorious area for the difficulty for NGOs to operate because of the political environment, right? It's one of the reasons why I guess human rights defenders have not operated in the area. But also secondly, there's over time been a growing distrust between mining companies and NGOs in Zimbabwe. Oftentimes this emanates from misinformation. So there have been multiple instances where companies have complained that NGOs have come in to do research and misinterpreted what they've got, or blown issues out of proportion, accusing companies, for example, of tax evasion in spaces where the mining companies feel that there hasn't been evasion, leading to government action, and given the Zimbabwean government's notoriety for ad hoc, very ad hoc decisions or policy changes, this creates a space where mining companies have sort of shied away from working with NGOs, and this research started opening some doors that we hope will stay open. But this again is a clear lesson around the need to bridge two trust deficits. The first is the trust deficit between NGOs and rural communities, and the trust deficit between NGOs and mining companies. Now, in terms of other lessons to learn, I think the human rights and ESG commitments need to be translated into policies and implemented. So they shouldn't just stay at the strategic level and on paper, but need to be seen on the ground. Grievance mechanisms need to be functional, and they also need to be made to adhere to good practice or the best fits in the context. As we see, some grievance mechanisms are literally not written down. They're not very clear to the community at times. And those are some of the challenges that we were seeing. And then community engagement and financing needs to be mainstreamed into business operations, meaning, an approach which both companies have actually taken to move it away from just corporate social responsibility, but making communities a shareholder in one way or the other in the actual economic activities of the mining operations. And there's need for clear structures for engagement with communities, which speaks again to the grievance mechanism. So not just around grievances, but also around opportunities and other discussions that go beyond grievances. And then NGOs can certainly play a role in monitoring company compliance to human rights issues. And again, that's based on bridging those two trust deficits. Then investment in communities and workers is a key business driver. Then lastly, community financing through procurement is important. So, skills training, distributed arrangements, and the like. This brings me to the end of this presentation. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you very much, Norman, for that very well articulated presentation of your findings. My take from your presentation is that it's clearly very possible for the companies and the communities to work together. And you have presented some quite good key examples and lessons on how that can be done. I was in Chirugwe myself talking to mining communities a couple of months ago, and actually can identify with some of the issues that we're talking about. But also, I remember a few years back, I have had a presentation from the Gwanda Community Share Ownership Trust during an alternative mining endeavor. And they were presenting what they have been able to do with all these finances that we're talking about, that Caledonia has presented to the communities. And my take is that over and above the mining company doing its part, it was a case where the community has also done its part. Not all the problems in Gwanda have been resolved, but at least at that point, there was an effort for the community share ownership scheme to really invest in what I would call very good projects. The communities was involved. They were presenting us with their strategic plan as a community, their audit. It was a very well organized setup. So I think part of this research, if you can add a couple more pages, is to see how, when that happens, how we can get a much better result, and also look at what these funds have been invested in and what they have done from Caledonia to the community. And also on the point of having plans, I think we also need to talk about the government having national action plans that can then be aligned with the mining companies' plans around the business and human rights. When the two are aligned and work together, then we have a more holistic, more sustainable win-win situation. Thanks for that. Dimas, are you ready to go? Dimas, you're on mute. I was telling Veronica earlier on that yesterday I saw a chat that says you are on mute, and I think we need to bite those, Claude, for Zoom participants to remember to unmute themselves. Dimas, you have your 10 minutes if you want to put your presentation on the screen, or?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share what we made. Let me just share my screen. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So, thank you very much. My name is Dimas Noia. I am a researcher at CDD, Centro para Democracia e Desenvolvimento. So, I think the present structure, the presentation structure is the same from the previous presentation. So, I will not speak a lot about that. So we all know that Mozambique inherited a colonial structure, mostly dominated by agriculture and almost non-existent of extractive industry, counting about 0.5%. But in the years of 2000 to, especially the mining sector, had been receiving a lot of foreign direct investments inflows. So this allowed exponential growth of extractive industry to contributing to the Mozambique economy. So for this study, we choose two companies. The first one is Kenmar Moma Mining, which is located in Nampula. and the second one is Valley, Mozambique. So let me see this. Yes, and the second one is Valley, Mozambique. So for Kenmar Moma Mining is a subsidiary of Kenmar Resource PLS and is a mining company located in Dublin, northern of Ireland. And Kenmar entered in Mozambique in 1986, but it began explorating activities in 1987. So in 2002, Kenmar Moma Mining signed a contract with the government for exploration of EV sands in Moma, Kongoli, and Kinga in Nampula. So actually the main asset of Kenmar is the Moma heavily sand mine. So this was our focus of study. And talking about Valley, Mozambique, Valley is one of the biggest producer in the coal sector in Mozambique and operate in the Moatize mines. So Valley was founded in Brazil in 1942, and the first name was Companhia Vale do Rio Doce, and now they changed the name for Valley since 2007. So Valley rapidly became one of the larger diversified mining companies in the Americas and the second largest in the world. And talking about Moatize mining, they started the contract with the government of Mozambique in June of 2007, and they started exploring coal. So talking about the methodology and approach we use in this study, in order to reach the proposed objective of the research, we used a qualitative method triangulating different techniques and data in data collating tools such as literature review, document reviews, and interviews. Talking about the field work, we had a lot of success interacting with the Kenmar Moma Mining, which is located in Nampula, and they received that very well. And unfortunately, in Tete, we had some challenges interacting with the company, and actually they received also very well us, but when was the time to get the answers? They just make the process very difficult. And we could see that also with some interaction with civil society there, that some of these companies in Tete have these problems interacting with civil society. So going ahead, and I cannot see, I prefer to make the slides like this. So going ahead about the company policy and practice on business and human rights, talking specifically about Kenmar. Kenmar has a human right policy that emphasizes the company commitment to respecting human rights and stakeholders throughout its spheres of influence. And we could see, we could get some of the main commitments of this human rights policy. And two of the main commitments is to proactively engage with local communities to discuss and address human rights issues related to Kenmar operations, and also to ensure that the security system guidelines and practice are consistent with the international standard. And apart from that, Kenmar also has a process called induction process. So this process of business and human rights actually works when every new worker, as soon as he joins at the company, before starting the work, before even having some interaction with his direct supervisor, he has to go to this induction process. So in the process, some notions and principles about human rights are taught, and the company enforces this principle. And we could see from the interview we made that this is not only for the new workers, this also works for the well-established workers. They yearly have to go to the refreshment to remind all of these human rights principles, as well as the subcontracted companies. So Kenmar makes sure that also the subcontracted companies have the opportunity to go through this induction process. And talking about Valley policy and practice on business and human rights, we could see from the research we made that Valley human rights strategies are analyzed with the United Nations principles on business and human rights. So they updated twice. The first update was in 2014 and the second in 2019. And they are constantly updating that in order to ensure that that is aligned with the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. So talking about community and participation, we could see that Kenmar bets, and also Valley, we could see that also, that they bet on a permanent interaction strategy. So the company has a full-time community officer. So this officer is responsible for interacting on a daily basis with the communities. Talking about Kenmar, they created a platform called Local Working Group. So Local Working Group is a platform of community participation, and the main objective of this local working group is to include relevant actors such as district administrator, government, teachers, young people, children, and so on. So they make sure all of these parts are in this platform, and every 2 months they make meetings in order to present. So Kenmar goes there and presents relevant information about operations and the future projects. And that's really important because all of these groups are always updated about the work that Kenmar is doing. And another thing that is important to say about Kenmar actions to community and participation is that they created committees at the neighbor level. So these committees are a group of young people who have worked with Kenmar in social initiatives. So one important thing that we saw is that one of these committees, they are responsible for carrying out actions to raise awareness and educate community in relations to environment and sanitation issues. So when we were doing the interview, we could see that this process began 4 years ago, and there are some results that show that this allows community to realize the impact of the company activity, and also demystify some negative interpretations that were originating in that area. So I think I talked a lot about Kenmar, but talking about the Valley, we could see that Valley seeks to establish a space for structured dialogue for the constructions of community relation plans. So these relation plans are monitored by community relation teams that have a routine to have meetings, and this monitoring is recorded and in the stakeholders' demand and issue system.
Yes, can you wrap up the presentation?
Sorry?
Can you move towards wrapping up the presentation?
Yes. So talking about the community grievance redress mechanism, we could see that Kenmar has 4 points, important points for community company grievance and redress. And one of them is that this mechanism are first presented to the community, and every time the company wants to change something, they have to submit to the community and explain why it's changing this. So this resolution, the community grievance and redress mechanisms, we can resume in 4 points. And the first one, the company receives complaints and registers the ensures that the same complaint reaches the district secretary and so on. So talking about Vale, they consider 2 important parts. The first part is the listening and the complaining. So Vale seeks to establish listening channels to capture all types of manifestations. So in this case of complainants, the company has a specific channel for complaints, and there is available an option to anonymity. So VAL also provides professionals community relations with the aim of strengthening dialogue and promoting engagement. So summarizing some of the key lessons that we could see, the first one is the mechanisms for improvements. So one of the things that we could see is that, for example, for the example of Kenmar, the community engagement process has been continuously improved. So in 2004, when the Kenmar began operating, the country still did not have a legislation framework to help guide the process. So along of the journey, the Kenmar was also finding ways in order to improve the mechanisms. And we think this is one of the most important things that we have to take in consideration. So, and the second good lessons that we can see is the action to raise awareness. As I stated in my presentation, we have some validation that from 4 years ago, this process of raising awareness and educate the community has shown results, positive results. So this allows community to realize the impact of the company activities and also help to demystify some of negative interpretations that may arise. So I think this is all, and thank you very much.
Obrigado, Dimas, for the very good presentation and sharing with us those 2 case studies from Mozambique. I think what comes to me is there seems to be quite some good engagement going on between the company and the community. But then the issue that Norman raised of the trust gap between the companies and the NGOs also seems to be an issue there. But thank you for those cases. We'll discuss more in the discussion. Jean-Pierre, are you ready? Jean-Pierre, I hope I'm still calling your name correctly as I learn my French. If you're ready, please go right ahead. Hello? Jean-Pierre, if you're not ready, let me, William, are you ready to go? I see you look like you're ready. So maybe you can go ahead and Jean-Pierre can come after you.
All right.
Go.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay.
Jean-Pierre, can you let William go and then you'll come after William? Sorry about that. Okay, William.
Hello? Yeah. All right, thanks. The dimension that we took from Zambia was really focused on the human rights, the risks that the communities that are surrounding mining companies, those that they are exposed to. So we thought that maybe those should be the benchmark for judging the success or failure of participation, you know, in this sphere. So just to take a note that our beginning was initially the beginning was a bit rough. I think, as my previous colleagues have mentioned, some mines that we thought we could engage and get a lot of information from, I think they developed cold feet. But even having that happened, I think the two mines that we eventually zoomed on, which is Sanje Hill Iron Ore and Lafarge, they were a good set of case studies because one is a multinational, you know, and highly advanced. And then the other, and of course, it started operations in 1949. So a lot of experience, a lot of global experience, and so on and so forth. Then the other one, Sanjay, was on a smaller scale, and it just started operating 2015. So we can say that one mine was large scale, the other one was medium to large. So I think that provided a bit of you know, lessons to learn from. So in terms of just to recap on the company profile, we are talking of Lafarge, a cement company. It's basically multinational, year of establishment, 1949. Market orientation for its products, it's both local and export, and of course it's large scale. Then when it comes to Sanjay, it's fully owned by Zambians. Operational year of start was basically 2017. Its market orientation is on one customer because it produces the iron ore to feed into the iron steel, which is the parent company. So these are the two profiles of companies, and they are all within the what we call Lusaka province. So in terms of research methodology, first we had to look at what kind of information do we need to ensure that we get the answers that we require. Of course, then we realized that we needed to first establish what's the state of human rights conditions in terms of risks in these communities that are surrounding mining projects, because that's an indicator, a basic indicator as to how we are performing in terms of participation. As you may be aware, the project, this study, was mooted on the understanding that with better community engagement, better community participation in the decision-making processes of these mines, then you would see a number of those mitigation efforts by these mines to be more effective and hence improve the conditions of those communities. So we had to get a synopsis of what the conditions are in terms of human rights. And by human rights, we zoomed down on the three key variables. We looked at environmental well-being, then we also looked at the socio-economic level of being or disruptions, and also the cultural aspects. So those were the focus areas. Then we also knew that we had to get the information on what is the status of human rights policy framework in the country. Having been a policy analyst before, of course, I saw that the study was trying to focus on meso level and corporate level kind of policies, the adequacy of those policies in terms of mitigating against human rights risks. But we had to go backwards because we know that the corporate level policy cannot be effective if the national level policy is not working. So we had to go a step back and also look at the national level policy as a basis so that we can judge the context properly for the effectiveness of policies. Then we know that we had to, at the end of the day, we had to see a policy gap, between what is expected and what was existing. We also knew that the gap would inform us as to the required interventions to enhance the policy framework at corporate level. And of course, those interventions have got a cost attached to it. So the implications, the interventions that we're going to see, we're going to have resource implications. And hence, coming with the financing options or the financing models that would be relevant to deal with the situation. So in terms of information required, that's what we're looking at. Study method, of course, we knew that it's a case study, but it will be interjected with a bit of survey approach. So
William,
it will be,
sorry, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay. So let me go straight to the synopsis of the human rights conditions in the communities surrounding the mining investments in Zambia. It's only that I'm not showing it on the laptop because of our issues, but a general conclusion is that almost every mine has been generating some kind of risks towards the community, which we are calling human rights. So I've given both on the 2 case studies and the other mines on a general level, indicating that we still have challenges in terms of human rights. Then we also looked at the three pillars of analysis that for a proper human rights policy framework in a country, it needs to have the issue of policy commitment. It needs to have the due diligence process. It needs to have even the remedial, the grievance aspect. So when you are looking at the fact that we had to ask one thing that we had to ask was, what is the state of human rights policy in Zambia? And we found that the mining companies do not have the backing of the normal backing that should be there by way of domesticating the UN guidelines. Zambia has not domesticated that, so it's up to the whims of the mines themselves to come up with their own policies. But even that, it weakens them already. So in terms of the strength of the policy in Zambia, it starts from the state, and the state has not protected, it has never assented, it has never taken responsibility to protect the human rights. So already we thought that that's a weakness, because it's supposed to prescribe not only the policy areas, but also the due diligence process. It should also provide for the grievance mechanisms that those mines are supposed to derive from in terms of their corporate level policies. So that all that area is missing, and hence the challenges that may be there. So in terms of state of policies at the corporate level, corporation level, we see that Lafarge, the multinational company, was so comprehensively endowed in terms of the policies that they have. It has a standalone human rights policy, which is also very well linked to other policies, such that the synergies from the other policies, they make it to be more effective in terms of community engagement. Alongside the human rights policy, it has also a communities and stakeholder engagement directive. And that directive has been used quite effectively, not only for the due diligence process, especially when they are coming up with plans on how to mitigate the potential sources of environment, potential negative effects to the community. It prescribes, starting from the impact assessment and how you engage the community and how the feedback comes in, how the monitoring takes place. Communities are engaged throughout the process. Of course, the only challenges, that the gaps that I saw were that because when you are dealing with the due diligence process, when you are aggrieved, for instance, I was thinking that the system may weigh in on non-judicial mechanisms, for instance, those that may appeal to maybe outside bodies, like the Association of Miners, so that if the community and the mine, they fail to engage, they fail to come to a conclusion, they can go to another higher level, maybe appeal to Miners Association. That one, I think, was a bit missing. And also, I felt that the process, when you look at the engagement, the process of the aim of consultation with the community, at the end of the day, what you are looking at is to come up with a shared decision which the company can implement. That is the principle that is there under the UN. But when you look at the documents, it's the consultation that gives the discretion to the company to take your advice or not. So for me, I feel that there's a gap between the company and what the philosophy of the guidelines talk about, because participation should result into your the aggrieved also having being heard, so to speak. So the whole system of stakeholder engagement, it has removed that aspect of having a share in the decision making. It has made it simply advisory. So to me, I think that's but it has tried in terms of trying to.
Can you wrap up, William?
Yes. So I'm not talking much about the other company because it's nascent, and one and two, it has been purely been basing its participation efforts based on the environmental impact assessment formula, which does not really get much from the community. So I think they're still organizing themselves, but really the level of participation is simply on an environmental assessment formula, so which is not much.
Okay.
So okay, a lot of things, if I leave them, they'll be in the report. I think.
Thank you, William. Yeah, we are sharing all the presentations.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the Zambia case. Is interesting in that it brings different kinds of different sizes of companies, because I think you shouldn't give an impression that this agenda is for the international big companies. So I think you did very well by bringing in a local company to see how they are also implementing this. This is a very good lesson that actually can be shared in the other countries as well, to move the comparison beyond big companies that are well equipped and well resources. Thank you very much. Jean-Pierre, I'll come back to you now. Hope you're ready and the connection is stable now. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, yes, I can hear you clearly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I apologize, for the connectivity troubles. So I started saying that I had connectivity troubles to connect my laptop. So unfortunately, I will not be able to share my presentation, but we'll send it after this after the meeting. So that is the first point. So let me move forward. I will say that in terms of the case study for DRC covers two large companies, which basically is the Tfm Mining and the Kakula projects. So I have the chance, to say, a couple of words about the Tfm and the Kamua project. In terms of methodology, we used qualitative method. We did a basic review to map out existing policies to understand, whether those companies have some policies that promote human rights, as well as community participation. We also used a focus group, and then we did the triangulation of information, to ensure that to measure to assess the effectiveness of policies. We also took a look to the DRC domestic human rights framework, just to understand whether the country itself enable promotion of human rights. So in terms of limitation, I will say that we had we had a success engagement with Tfm, and then very less engagement with the Kamua project. This is due to the particularity of the research, because when we started, we targeted two companies previously. I will say that initially we targeted two companies, and then we changed it because we didn't find much practices around one of the companies. So I think this really I think created some limitation in terms of time to engage adequately with Kamwa project. So let me now start with the Tfm project, which is I would say that maybe a couple of words about the rationale. Why did we select these two companies? They are really large companies. Tfm is Tfm, which is basically a Tfm mining. Run is the largest and the most productive mine in the DRC. Its contribution to the DRC treasury has been substantial. So I will say that it can be Tfm is number one in terms of contribution to the government revenues. So the parity company is the China molybdenum, which is basically the parity companies. And then Icmm, which is the public companies, the DRC public companies hold the 20% of share. So what did we find through the research? We said that, as I said from the methodology section, is that we found that Tfm as companies, as well as I would say basically because there was just to flag that China molybdenum bought share in 2016. So before that, the parent company was the Freeport Moran, who was the parent companies. So we tried to take a look both on the Freeport Michael Moran, policies, human rights policies, as well as CIMOC policies. So we found that both parent companies has had clear policies to promote human rights in theory, which is very great. Both of them has commitment to promote to implement a human rights charter. So basically this is what we found in terms of theory. But we also found out that when doing the desk review, that there was no specific commitment, no existing policies that aims to promote gender. So that is really, I think, a key point, and no policy that really seek to promote gender. So that's it. That's what we found. When it comes to talk about the mechanisms that put in place by Tfm to promote community participation as well as to advance human rights, we found that the company set up 4 mechanisms that could support a community engagement as well as community participation. The first of them is that Tfm created a community social fund, which has the mandate to support community development and the participation through community forum. So that is the first, mechanism, I would say, that as the tool that used by companies. So basically, the community social development fund is paid by 0.3% of gross revenue from Tfm that is allocated to fund the community development. So community development is a non-profit organization. Company created it as a non-profit organization that, as I said, that has mandated to fund community as well, to leverage community engagement. The second mechanism I would say is the existence of a grievance and the due diligence mechanism. So the company put in place, the grievance mechanism, which basically consists to register complaint from communities. So what I will say is that on that point specifically, I will say that I think when we engaged with the communities, we realized that the mechanism was very slow and not so efficient, following the perspective from communities. So I think that this has been creating some frustration from communities because it takes a long, a long time and a long process, for community to get from companies. And number three, in terms of mechanisms, TFM facilitated the creation of a voluntary principle on security and human rights, a working group, surrounding, its operations. So that is really, important point to see, because the company provided some logistics and the financial support that was necessary to ensure that stakeholder can engage. So you have delegates from civil society organization, from government, local authorities, as well as some community leaders that has the framework to discuss about human rights and voluntary the way that the company operation affect the communities. I think that is really and the last one, the last mechanism is really is part of the legal requirement from from the mining code revision. The mining code call company to sign I would say it a kind of a sort of community development plan. So that is really and the law called to set up a local community, a local committees at communities that will be oversee the implementation of local community development standard between companies and the communities. So this basically is really the four tools of the four mechanisms that Tfm put in place. So before I go to the lesson, let me just say a couple of words related to Kamoa project. So about Kamoa project, I would say that the Kamoa project is a a large, and again a large greenfield deposit of copper and cobalt. And the part of the company is Ivano, which is basically a Canadian company, and the Zijing Mining Group, who is the Chinese companies. Both of them hold about owns about 40% of the share, while the DRC government owns 30% of the share. Kamoa still at this stage still just started the production, and that is part of the challenge that we faced to engage with them, because they have been, the company was launching the plant, so we had some limitation in terms of engagement from companies. So when it comes to talk about the existence of the policies of human rights, it really same approach with TFM a commitment to to implement human rights charter, commitment for them to imply voluntary principle on security and human rights. So basically this is really so they are participating in this working group on a voluntary principle and on security and human rights, created with the facilitation from TFM as I said. So that is really the first mechanism is company to promote human rights. The second thing, the second mechanism or tool that we found was they also put in place a grievance and the due diligence mechanism, which is basically really good in DRC. And of course, then they have been engaging with the communities through what we call basically a community development committee. So that is really the three mechanisms that that we map. So in terms now, I'm getting to the end to talk about a little bit about
yes, that's fine. Please wrap up, please.
Yeah, thank you. About lesson learned from that, I have a couple of lessons that I want to share from them. We thought that the top-down approach leaded to the exclusive participation of the most affected people in affected by mining mining operation, because as we see that the two companies have really put in place many framework to leverage engagement, but in practice it's very difficult for companies to engage with communities. So this is part of the fact that this is really the top down approach. So that is the first thing. And the second, I would say, is we saw also that, all of these community participation mechanisms, tended to revolve around the most visible and influential actors from communities. So we see that individuals that, are really, engaging the companies, rather than a community, rather than affected communities. Another thing I think that very important to say here is that we saw that, through all of these mechanisms, we saw that in the campaign really don't focus on the processes of getting community engaged. You see, that companies have set up their own objectives. So they are expecting only to do consultation, you see, to say that we are doing this, but not really, to put, in place a genuine process that can, enable in community participation. That is really key. And number 4, we saw that a sufficient capacity from communities, was a barrier to effective engagement between companies and the communities. For Kamua, for example, they've been funding 2 NGOs, basically based, the 2 NGOs that get some logistics and the financial support, for companies. They are not come from communities. You see, so community perception is like these NGOs are working for companies. So this is really, we saw that good practices, seeing that the first time in DRC that a company that fund NGO directly, you see, but the NGO that that are outside of communities, you see. So the perception of communities, like these NGOs are working for companies. So that's, and the last one, I'm gonna stop there, please. The last one is about, we saw that there was no assessment of existing mechanisms to draw the lesson to what extent, all of these frameworks and the mechanisms has been really able to leverage community, participation. I think that is really, no one of them that try to assess the effect, the effectiveness as well to learn from, these, mechanisms. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, for your patience.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre, for bringing the case study from DRC. I know that for many years, Claude and his team were working very hard on the revision of the La Code Minière. That's my French. See, I can speak some French. And that it is actually bringing some positive changes, or we can see some progress in terms of the changes that it can bring to the ground. We have listened to 4 very interesting case studies from Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, and now DRC. We will not have the South Africa presentation. So from those 4, we have had the details of how the study was conducted and what the findings are. I would just like to open up for a couple of questions or reactions or comments for clarification before we move on to the next session. So if you have a question for any one of our panelists or would just like to contribute, please raise your hand so that we give you an opportunity. Anyone who would like to respond to the 4 presentations? I see Veronica, but Veronica, why don't I see first if there is somebody else? You're not the biggest priority right now. I will try, unless there is other participants, then you can come in. Can I just ask if there are other participants than Veronica for now, for a reason? Who wants to go? Okay, maybe not. So, Veronica, you got saved. Please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
All right, thanks a lot, more blessings. I think my question goes to either Norman, Dimas, or Jean-Pierre, because they flag out that they asked actually, in the case studies, they are companies, for example, Caledonia through Blanket Mine has created the community share ownership schemes. And in DRC, there seems to be also this the Mines and Minerals, the revised mining code points that mining companies should provide a certain percentage of their operations towards directly to communities. And these community development agreements or initiatives, my question would be, how open are such community development initiatives that have been fostered by companies to probably support the work of civil society organizations and also community-based organizations that are passionate about promoting issues of human rights within their operations? Because I believe there's a lot of financing that is going to such initiatives, but maybe the question is, do such also communities, or do communities also feel that such initiatives could also really leverage and do some of that work that you are alluding to in your finance?
Thank you, Veronica. Any other question or reaction? No, I don't see any. Okay. Our presenters, who wants to go first? Norman or Dimas or Jean-Pierre?
Yeah.
Or William?
Can I come in?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica, for this question. Yeah, I want maybe to flag two things, which is basically part of innovations that came out with the mining code in DRC. Basically, we have the local community development agreement, which means that the company will sign agreement with communities, and then to fund agreed projects, infrastructure projects, community projects. So that is the first one. And then the second one is about what you said about the obligation, the legal requirement from the mining code, which call for each company to save 3% of its gross revenue to allocate it to community development fund, which basically, but what I said for the instance, because the question is that how open is it, this, framework, how we said that to that last point in the DRC, to the we said that we still need, a regulation act from government to implement, to leverage implementation of the mining provision, the mining code provision on a 0.3%, to go to communities. So there's no now yet in existing companies, exception of the Tfm, because the Tfm, its commitment, its obligation is coming from the mining agreement signed within government before before the mining code. So no company that really has no experience now on how this framework has been how money how much money will be allocated to promote human rights or community participation. So I'm not going really to address this one, but I can maybe talk about the Tfm case, which is a specific case, as I said. So for the instance, I will say that we didn't map out any support that comes from the community development fund that support community participation, neither to support local community group to monitor the impact of a project of a Tfm project on human rights, and unfortunately there's not really any evidence, neither no, I will say that there is no.
Thank you, Jean. Can you finish?
Yeah, thank you.
Don't make another presentation in answering the question.
All right. So, and then when it comes to talk about the community development agreement, which basically I said that which is already implemented, even Tfm And the Kamoa, we said that, for the instance, there is no funding, there is no openness, there's no any discussion about how far, to ensure that, that this, agreement could support human rights, promotion. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I got two questions from Lorenzo Wakefield. The first one, are there legislative requirements linked to mining licenses that require mining companies to invest in development projects in the communities where they operate in these 4 countries? If so, how is this implemented by the different governments where it exists? And the second question is directed to Norman. Do local leaders who get consulted and sit on boards of companies always defend and promote communities' interests? In countries like Sierra Leone, this is not always the case, as paramount chiefs benefit financially from mining investments, as explained in this article. I guess this speaks to the example that you gave, Norman, from the case study of Rwanda, where the chief sits in the board of Caledonia. You can respond to, maybe I should start with you, Norman, to respond to this specific one, but also to the other previous questions that have been asked, because I didn't give you an opportunity.
Thank you, more blessings. So the question around, the traditional leaders who sit on boards and whether they work in a way that benefits communities. Firstly, I would need to explain that in our study, we only came across one example. So I cannot use that to extrapolate their behavior to every other traditional leader in Zimbabwe. But in that case, what we saw looked like a good example of community company collaboration, where the chief was the representative of the Gwanda Community Share Ownership Trust. So he sat on the board because the community holds 10% of the shareholding. He was not there as an ex-officio member. He actually had beneficial ownership backing him to sit on that board. And in this case, the key role that he seemed to play was really taking grievances from communities to the board and sort of ensuring that the community has a voice on the board. What we see across Zimbabwe, and this is very unique, it's not what typically happens in Zimbabwe. What we typically see in Zimbabwe is traditional leaders, and because the traditional leaders in Zimbabwe fall across 3 groups, you have your chiefs, then you have headmen and village leaders who are subordinates to chiefs. What you typically have is they tend to play an extractive role. They and sorry to use that term while talking about extractives, that's a different meaning of the word extractive, but they tend to look for ways of getting rents from mining companies, either by requesting that they should do annual rituals so that, the local spirits are appeased, which could be very genuine cultural issues, but sometimes they are abused for other means. It can also come down to issues of use and allocation of communal land where many minerals are found, and again using that opportunity to get something for themselves, and oftentimes you see companies that are asked to build a house for the chief, are asked to provide water and electricity to the chief, and just that, not to the community, just to those. So we do see some of what you see in Sierra Leone here in Zimbabwe. And I'll just go quickly to Veronica's question, which was about how open can CSOTs, CSOTs open to offer funding towards business and human rights work, e.g. CBOs. So at a personal opinion, I would differ on this one, because I feel if you're looking at $100 that went to a CSOT from a mining company, right? And you're in an impoverished region and you ask yourself, what is the best use of that $100? Is it, to fund education, fund water, and other basic services? I don't think, and I'm not saying the work of CBOs in fighting for human rights is not important. I'm just saying I would not put it as a key requirement. And this is reflected in what you see across many mining companies and operations where you don't see this sort of work funded. I don't think it's an issue of it not being important, but I think it's an issue of prioritization, because many what you often see with a lot of CBOs in the Zimbabwean context is they are parallel structures. They are not really, oftentimes they're not really part of the community. And by that, I mean, and this might sound a bit controversial, but what I see in rural areas is you have village development committees, you have village assemblies, ward assemblies, and ward development committees, which are structures that have been in these areas for a long period of time, and they're supposed to play this function of fighting for, respect for human rights, community development. And these CBOs that you find often come in, try to play that role because these existing institutions are either politicized, are ineffective, or underfunded, or under-resourced. And I mean, a key question there is, would you then fund the parallel structure, or would you find ways of improving the existing sustainable structures? So for me there, I would say the key opportunity is probably looking at how can existing CSOTs fund the strengthening of the governance, the accountability, and the transparency of existing parallel community structures, such as village development committees, ward development committees, and ward assemblies. And maybe these CBOs and CSOs can play that role of building their capacity and not take over their role because they're not sustainable. They will not be there for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you very much for that. We have lost.
There's a question.
Sorry, very briefly, William. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, the other question that you brought up, it wasn't answered in terms of the regulations that support companies to support projects in their areas. This brings me to I think Pierre. I think he mentioned, but I didn't pick it up. But in Zambia, there is no regulation that compels a mining company to support a project, a social enterprise, so to speak. In Zambia, there's nothing like that. Just like there's no law for corporate social responsibility. So I just wanted, maybe you heard something.
It's purely voluntary.
It's purely voluntary, yes. But I don't know if you, maybe you got something from Congo DR, because there was that 3%. Is there such a law there?
As far as I understand, it is in the new code, La Code Minière.
Yeah, exactly. There is a legal requirement to all companies that operate in the DRC, to set up, community development fund, which will be each company has, to allocate 0.3%, to that fund. And then there is another requirement. Beside that, there is a legal requirement for each company in the DRC to sign a community local development agreement, which basically is part of the negotiations that community and the company will negotiate, and then they will reach an agreement. So I want just to touch, to be very brief on that point.
Maybe we can come back at the end, at the final discussion, Jean-Pierre.
Okay, because the question that comes is, because I think that from community has a possibility to negotiate. I think that if community can align, human rights engagement, that's a part of a project when negotiating with a company. I think that is, I think for me, that is very open. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. You have to pardon us. We lost some time at the beginning waiting for people to log in, and we have lost some time as we go on. But please bear with us. This interesting discussion is for all our benefits. I hope you don't have to leave before we finish. We'll have more, hopefully have more discussion towards the end, William, so don't worry, hopefully. But now we will go to the second session of our meeting. And in this session, we have financial institutions, mining industry, and civil society perspective on development by mining companies to promote human rights and community participation. And I have three panelists, Fred from African Development Bank, Roy Tash, and Erin, and they are all here. I'll start with Roy Tash. Roy Tash, if you were listening to some of those case studies, I'm sure you were smiling from ear to ear if some of those people are your members. So yeah, some good cases to learn from. So I see you are smiling already. So you took something out of that. Please go ahead with your presentation, and welcome. And thank you for the our first meeting that we have with you under the new ICMM leadership. We appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
More blessings. Thank you so much, colleagues. It's great to be with you. I'm smiling because it was a joy to hear some of the case studies. Some of those are ICMM member companies, others are not, but good work everywhere is a real pleasure to see. Colleagues, for those that may not be familiar with ICMM, I will just give you an introduction to what ICMM is about, and then take 5 or 7 minutes to give you a set of considerations that we see as ICMM on the issue of human rights and community participation. So I took over in April this year as the CEO of ICMM. That stands for the International Council on Mining and Metals. It is a voluntary group of 28 of the world's largest mining and metals companies. Together, these 28 account for about 1/3 of the global production of the mining and metals industry. But we also have 35 associations that are members, national associations and commodity associations. And through them, we reach another 1,500 or so mining companies. And the reason for ICMM's existence is to voluntarily aim for the best performance on social, environmental, and governance grounds. Of course, the members don't always get it right, and we have seen painful incidents in the recent past of when things don't go according to plan. What we try and do is learn from those, to use the ICMM as a vehicle to work with others to constantly raise our performance and to aim higher and to constantly deliver those. So today we will be talking about our approach to community participation and human rights, but we have a much broader set of commitments towards sustainability and responsible mining, which are encapsulated in 10 mining principles. And human rights is one of the founding principles. So I will talk about that, but perhaps on another occasion, if it's of interest, I can talk about the other parts of our commitment to responsible and sustainable mining. So when it comes to human rights and community participation, as I say, our members, the 28, but the wider industry does not always get it right. And you have, through the case studies, I think, highlighted some of the challenges that still need to be overcome. But if I can summarize, there are 3 things that we as the group of 28 try and achieve when it comes to human rights and community participation. The first is to make human rights and good community participation that benefits everybody as a non-negotiable. It is a founding principle of ICMM. Any company that is a member of ICMM has to have this as a core principle. So it is number 3 of our 10 sustainable development principles. And every single of the 28 member companies has a clear position and commitment on their work on human rights. It is a baseline expectation for us. It is non-negotiable. And we, of course, have participated in all the processes of the last 2 decades that have led to the creation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And that is something that we will continue to remain committed to and help develop and raise further. So the first thing I want to say is, for us as ICMM, which, as I said, is a voluntary group of companies that try and achieve the highest standards of sustainability performance, for us, human rights and community participation are non-negotiable. The second set of activities that we undertake, and these are resources that are available to all of you. It is not just to ICMM member companies. Every company in the world and practitioners have access to all of ICMM's resources and materials. These are not meant just for the 28. The second activity we do is to try and set for ourselves standards for what good performance looks like in the areas of human rights and community participation. And here I will just highlight 3 resources that we have recently produced that capture some of our thinking about what good looks like when it comes to human rights and community participation. The first was in 2019, we updated our guidance on how companies should handle local level grievances and concerns. This was an important piece of guidance that we updated in 2019, and it integrates the 8 effectiveness criteria of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So that is one very important piece of guidance document that we have now made available to our members and beyond. The second is a community development toolkit that we have produced that once again captures lessons and insights about the best approaches to community development. And the third is our good practice guide to engaging indigenous peoples. And once again, this good practice guide sets out, both using case studies as well as other approaches, what we expect all of our members to deliver when it comes to performance on indigenous peoples. So these 3 are examples of resources that we have produced and the work we continue to do to show what good performance looks like. So as I said, the first item is make it a non-negotiable. The second is show what good looks like. And the 3 resources I've talked about are just some examples of it. And then the third pillar of our approach is to make our voice heard as the industry on improving the global standards and approaches on human rights and community participation. And here I'll just mention a few areas that we are involved in. The first is we are permanent observers, of course, to the voluntary principles on security and human rights. And we believe that that is a commitment that we will continue to uphold. The second is, of course, we are delegates at the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights, which again allows us to participate in multilateral processes that are aimed at securing and raising the standards of human rights and community participation. The third is that we, and perhaps some of the other colleagues that are represented on the panel today may also be members of this organization, is the Business Network on Civic Freedoms and Human Rights Defenders. That is something that we voluntarily participate in and support because we believe it is an essential means of equipping practitioners, particularly human rights defenders. And the fourth is a 15-year commitment that we have made to a program called the Skills Initiative, where we are working with our partners to make sure that communities are able to thrive at each stage of the mining operation, right through from pre-planning through to operation post-closure. So these are examples of how we try and use the collective voice we have as a group of 28 of the world's largest mining companies to push for even greater standards of human rights protection and for community participation. So as I say, number one, make it non-negotiable. Number two, show what good looks like. And number three, make our voice heard. These are the 3 key pillars of our approach. So more blessings, I will perhaps just leave it there. If there are any immediate questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them. But it's been my pleasure to be in this group to share what we as ICMM are doing to make you aware of the resources we have. And hearing the case studies, I have certainly learned a lot about some important work that is happening on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Reuters, and for keeping to time. Very good hearing more about the tools that are available within ICMM. There's a lot of work. We've heard that there's a lot of good work that is happening, but there's a lot of work, bad work that is happening. And how does ICMM use its strategic positioning to make sure that that bad work that needs to be good is done for the benefit of the communities? And I quite like what you said about the make it non-negotiable. I think it speaks, I have a feeling at the back of my mind that it speaks to what William was thinking when he was talking about the voluntary or non-voluntary. So maybe we need to get to a point where it becomes a non-negotiable. Otherwise, as long as it's a voluntary instrument, you cannot hold people accountable to such an instrument. And at the end of the day, we'll keep coming back with the same problems and same challenges. Thank you for that. Next on my list is Fred. Fred, where are you? Fred. Now we're going to hear from the bank, our very own bank. And hear what Fred has to say on the issue. Is your mic on or off? Or?
Yes, I am.
There we go. Please go ahead.
Thank you indeed, more blessings. It is your bank, and that's why we are here. First of all, I would like to thank Sarawi for inviting us. Thank you very much, because this is the kind of forum where we get the bank's work known. Greetings to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to join the others in thanking the first presenters on the work that they are doing in this area. Now, more blessings, I have taken the liberty to slightly change my topic on what you would like me to speak to, having listened to what has been discussed since morning. And what I will therefore be speaking about is how mining companies can contribute to development through promotion of human rights and community participation, the perspective of the African Development Bank. The way I will do the presentation is basically to speak to four sub-themes very briefly. Accessing and retaining financing from development institutions like ours. Safeguarding human rights in development financing. Inspection and monitoring of projects, and some pitfalls that mining companies need to avoid before I conclude. Before I do that, just an introduction of the bank. It is indeed your own bank. The African Development Bank has all the 54 African countries as shareholding countries. We also have 27 other countries from outside Africa. We run strategies, and the current strategy, 10-year strategy that we are running, is from 2013 to 2022. We have just started updating it. But two objectives are in this current strategy. One, inclusive growth, and two, a transition to green growth. These are indeed the foundation of some of our work. And out of these objectives, we have also picked priorities. 5 priorities are the ones we are running with currently. 1, to light up and power Africa, in other words, electricity. Feed Africa, agriculture. Industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and generally to be able to improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. In the mining sector, these 5 priorities are all able to be met using minerals. The bank is therefore one of the key institutions that is currently implementing the Africa Mining Vision, and we are part of the institutions that actually contributed to the development of the Africa Mining Vision. So this is the relevance of the mining. Now, how do private sector or the mining companies access and retain financing from development institutions? Just to define, the African Development Bank has 2 windows of financing. The sovereign operations, which is the bigger operations, where we deal with governments in lending. But we also have another window, the non-sovereign operations, which is the private sector that I will be talking about when I relate to mining companies. Needful to note here that when I speak about development financing, I will only be relating to development financing institutions and not commercial bank financing institutions. This is critical because in the development finance, we do not only look at profitability, but we look at what is it that brings development in the operations we finance. And so in assisting the private sector, we do not only provide financing, but we also provide advisory and technical assistance in order for the financing to bring out development. This is why in all applications that come to the bank, they are processed through an evaluation process. And there is a component called Additionality and Development Outcome Assessment, or ADOA specifically. And in here, 7 things are looked at. 7 different aspects are evaluated. 1, what is the household benefit and jobs that will be created in financing this project? Is there any infrastructure that will come along as number 2? In other words, if a mining company is going to ask for financing and there is additionality of a road, a railway, or a port coming along, then this is an additionality. governance aspects. How are the borrowers able to use this in implementing these aspects? Regional integration, do you only look at your country? What are the impacts with the neighboring countries? The regional benefit. Contribution to green growth is key, and so is gender and social effects. And finally, private sector development is also critical in this. So as we assess the projects, these are some of the development outcomes that must also be evaluated. How do we deal with safeguards in terms of human rights in development financing? Now, all development financing institutions, World Bank, IFC, Asia Development Bank, but our own as well, commit to not supporting any activity that causes or contributes to human rights violation, including non-discrimination. So this is the foundation. And there must be procedures that are developed in order to fully and effectively participate, have the participation of the affected communities and marginalized groups. This is something that is supposed to be undertaken for all our financing projects. There must be due diligence requirements, including assessment and management of environment, social and human rights risks and impacts. Safeguard policies are also ensured that they are in line with human rights norms, including aspects that relate to the UN and human rights guidelines. There are also mechanisms that provide effective community access to remedy any actions. In other words, there must be not only rules, but what will be the situations that will be used in order to look at this. So the African Development Bank applies all these 5 critical aspects of safeguarding human rights, and we take this serious because it is one of the things that are assessed in rating banks, and the African Development Bank is a AAA credit rated company or institution, depending on what we do. Now, how do we relate and monitor some of the activities we commit to undertake? One is the main aspect we use in following up these aspects is through inspection at procurement and contract management. All our standard bidding documents require the borrowers, for instance, to ask that any contractor that will be benefiting from funds received from the African Development Bank must adopt some codes of conduct. These codes of conduct, sometimes depending, have to cascade down to employees who must be trained and must be able to comply to these codes, including aspects like gender-based violence, child abuse, sexual exploitation, all these included. And it is supposed to be the contractors monitoring these aspects, and they can even terminate employment if these are not complied to. Still, in the standard bidding document, contractors are required to submit management strategies and implementation plans.
5 more minutes.
Yes, I'll be done shortly. Thanks. So these aspects in the standard bidding documents are very critical because we also look at what is your history as a company that is getting to benefit from these activities. So there is declaration of previous contract terminations and aspects that relate to what you did in the past and how you have moved on. Environmental performance guarantees are required, 3% of contract amounts, and this is intended for contractors to submit specific guarantees for meeting environmental and social obligations. Aspects of reporting are critical, and not only your own way of reporting, but there are ways in which you must report, and matrices are developed that will be able to include aspects of health, safety, environment, and social aspects. Now, let me talk about how else. In other words, I have talked about procurement, but also monitoring of contracts. But in addition, I must emphasize that all projects have supervision of the bank. We have audits and we have independent evaluators to make sure that all these things we have put down are enforced or followed. Allow me to just highlight some pitfalls from our experience. We have seen pitfalls that mining companies need to avoid. One, it has been emphasized from the beginning that mining produces negative impacts due to just their nature of operations. However, if mitigations are factored into the mining plans from the outset, then the benefits become positive. And so we recommend that mining companies do not ignore communities in terms of local content. In other words, employment of locals and being able to create business development opportunities for local suppliers is critical for their operations. And in undertaking these aspects, any recruitments must be transparently made. And this is critical even for the smallest jobs possible. In some of the areas we have worked, we have seen that there have been complaints of biases in improvement in recruitments, and the recommendations have been that the companies should actually even use referrals in order to pick employees of the same caliber in order to be employed. Supplier development is critical, so is SME development, and corporate social responsibility must only be undertaken with the communities in the selection process. We have seen schools built, water pumps, installed, and they are not used because the communities were not involved. In conclusion, just 4 aspects, 4 points to note as I conclude. One is that not all big profitable projects can access financing from the African Development Bank. Scrutiny of companies on community impacts and involvement is key. Environment and social safeguards of the African Development Bank are the cornerstones of the bank's support for inclusive growth and environmental sustainability in Africa. Now, the bank does not stop at financing of selected projects. So we may select your project, but we don't stop there. We go an extra mile and get involved in different checks and balances, including human rights performance through bidding, monitoring, bidding processes, monitoring of contracts and supervision of activities. The final aspect is that governments too have a role. It is not only prudent for us to put these laws, these aspects in place of guidelines from the financing perspective, but governments must put in place conducive policies, legal, regulatory, and institutional frameworks that will be useful in implementation of these aspects. And this is why at the African Development Bank, there is a department called the African Natural Resources Center, whose role is to advise governments on how they can maximize benefits from communities and host countries using their natural resources. More blessings. Thank you very much for this. We can have more engagements after the session. Thank you.
Definitely. That is the point of this whole discussion. And Fred, thank you for the assurance that our bank is on our side and is on the table to journey with us in this process. Actually, while we are saying that, I just wanted to say we are thinking that because of time, we will also talk about those who might be interested in joining a working group to develop best practices. So just think about that as I call upon, last but not, I was saving the best for last, the powerful lady, Erin. He's coming in. Erin is the Director of Programs for Namati. Welcome to the meeting, Erin. And we saved you for the last because you're the best. Please go ahead.
Thanks, more blessings. And I really appreciated just hearing the case studies today and then this panel with the contributions from Icmm and the African Development Bank. So delighted to be here. As More Blessings said, I work with Namati, which is an organization that does legal empowerment at a very basic, in a basic sense, just helping people affected by investments to know, use, and shape the law, so to exercise their rights in practice. We do this work in 6 countries in Africa and South and Southeast Asia. But in addition to our own direct work, we also convene a community of practice of civil society organizations, local and national civil society organizations working across the globe. So that community of practice has more than 2,000 organizations working in 160 countries. And what I want to talk about today, just reflecting on some of what's come up, is really focusing in on, there's been a lot of important progress made on commitments to human rights. So really setting progressive standards and human rights frameworks within operating companies as well. Yet we still see this persistent gap between those commitments and practice on the ground. And that was coming out at several points in the case studies. And I'm particularly thinking about preventing harm through community participation in decision-making about project operations, and then grievance redress and access to remedies. So really focusing in on those 2 pieces. And I want to think about the question, what does it take to bring commitments to life in practice? And particularly, given how we work, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of communities, so sort of a bottom-up perspective on this, as Jean-Pierre was gesturing to. And what I would say is it's really important to create space for consultations, but that in and of itself is not enough. To engage effectively, communities need to be an empowered counterparty. So this is about capacity building, making sure that communities understand who to engage and how to engage. For example, some of the case studies mentioned that in some cases, communities weren't aware of grievance redress mechanisms, didn't know who the contact people were for mines, didn't necessarily know what types of grievances could be taken up through these mechanisms, often may have been left out in some of the forums that were created for more open consultation around social license. So really thinking about what it takes to engage them. And I would also say that there are important asymmetries, even where these spaces exist and communities are present, there are important asymmetries in access to information. So really understanding what their rights are under law, what the environmental regulation is, and the specific requirements in operating licenses for mining companies, the contents of EIAs, which can be hundreds or in some cases even 1,000 pages long, highly technical. And in the case that there has been a harm, really understanding the full nature of the impacts, including things that may not be visible, for example, groundwater contamination with toxic contaminants, and being able to sort of assess the possible effectiveness of proposed remedies. So having the technical support needed to really engage with some of those hard questions. These are areas where companies themselves are hiring experts and consultants to advise them. Yet on the other hand, communities don't have the access to the same legal and technical assistance. The need for this is called out clearly in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, particularly when they're thinking about the effectiveness criteria for grievance redress mechanisms. So really pointing to this assistance for communities to be that engaged counterparty is an important element. Yet we know that for companies who may, I think, are increasingly recognizing this as well, and they're running up into problems from their end too, where they're really trying to create these spaces and wanting to engage, but recognizing that some of what's needed for communities to be that counterparty isn't there. And this requires significant time, specific skill sets, knowledge, deep knowledge of local, social, and cultural contexts. So it's not something that companies are well placed to do directly, this sort of capacity building and support. And where they've tried to pay others, the DRC case study was useful in this sense. It leads to lots of questions about conflict of interest and who the support providers are ultimately representing and accountable to. So what we really need is a way to enable independent technical and legal assistance for communities. So we have been thinking a lot about what does this look like? It is important, it's necessary that communities have the support. I would say that it is something that companies should bear the cost of by earmarking a small fraction of the project budget for. Yet this direct funding from company to CSO or other experts to provide community assistance, it poses all sorts of problems of conflict of interest and questions of accountability. So we've been exploring the idea of setting up a neutral third-party mechanism that can finance technical assistance for communities. I might just quickly share my screen here. See if this will work. So we're really interested in the idea of a pooled fund, which again would be independently managed, and companies could contribute a small amount of money to this fund, and then the fund would make grants directly to communities themselves or to CSOs that communities have selected as a partner. And this would effectively de-link the funding from the company itself and ensure that the support that's being provided is independent and directly accountable to communities. There's an important role here too for financial institutions and industry associations. They've in many ways been driving some of the important progress made on ESG standards and human rights commitments. And so I think, again, could really set important norms around communities' access to independent legal and technical assistance, requiring companies to pay into this type of mechanism. And I think this can actually solve some of the implementation gaps that we're seeing on the ground with grievance redress mechanisms being unknown to communities, being slow to process, with issues that come up in obtaining social license and these consultation processes where communities may still not feel they've actually been heard and their voice has been taken into account. So it has a real functional element, I think, in solving some of the problems that companies are running into, as well as ensuring that communities feel like they have access to the support they need to engage. And I think would be an important way to reinforce some of the norms around community participation and access to remedy, really unpacking what does it mean to make those commitments to those two things. So this is an idea that we're excited about and we've been exploring in consultation with operating companies, financial institutions, and civil society organizations who do this work directly on the ground. And so just wanted to put this out there as wanted to highlight the importance of access to independent assistance, legal and technical assistance for communities, and some of the ways that that could be built into existing standards and human rights frameworks. And then share this idea as a way to solve some of that challenge of channeling financing so that companies are indeed bearing this cost associated with their operations while addressing the concerns about conflict of interest and maintaining accountability directly to communities instead of to the company. I will stop there for now. There's certainly a lot more to unpack, and have just been really delighted to hear some of what's coming out of the assessments and then some of the reflections that the panelists here from ICMM and AFDB have shared. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Erin. Also for emphasizing much more on the community aspects. And I like what you said about access to information, because when we have information, we sit on laptops with data, we can access all kind of information. We assume that everybody has access, the same access, which is not the case. I think that is a very important issue to highlight. There is need for even very basic information for communities. I will open up for a couple of questions and responses to this three presentations from Erin, from Claude, and from Rohitesh. If we need any more information from them or need to ask them questions. Claude, I see your hand is up very quickly. Can you unmute yourself? Claude, can you unmute yourself, please? Okay, Claude.
Can I speak now? Can you hear me?
Now we hear you, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted quickly to ask Fred, and thank you for a very good presentation. If what Erin have just spoken about, the community fund, it's something that the bank could encourage the companies that they fund to contribute to. I'm asking this because what Irene is presenting, access to remedy, community participation type of funds, and to resolve many of the problems that Jean-Pierre, Buta, and many others have spoken about. Can the bank see as something that is worth it to support? That one. I see Ashwin is gone. I also wanted to ask that from the ICCMA, if that is important for them, is something that they can encourage companies to contribute to. Thank you. More blessing.
Thank you, Claude. Fred and Reuters, please respond to that.
I did not see Reuters. She's still there.
I hope so. If not, but Fred can go ahead in the meantime.
Okay, I could go fast. Thank you, Claude, for the question. Indeed, some of our funded activities may go to benefit the communities, but it is important that this is discussed at the negotiation of the loans that are given. In other words, when a loan is being discussed, there may be provisions for trust funds that can be able to supplement in order to support the activities to develop. What the bank will not do, however, is to get cash and give it to communities directly. We have seen the trend, like Pierre talked about, that many of the new laws, however, require that there are community funds built in. In other words, the new laws in DR Congo require this, but we also see in the petroleum sector, the recently signed petroleum industry bill in Nigeria also creates such funds. So this may actually be the trend to go from the legal perspective. In terms of funding, I think financing, it may not be directly that we may be able to give the funds, but sometimes during negotiations, if there is a critical aspect that will impede the development of the project, then that is covered under additional funds that are given as not as a loan, but as aspects of a grant that are supplementary to the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. If Reuters is not here, Erin, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I really appreciate those thoughts, Fred. And I think I would distinguish perhaps a trust fund for community development writ large. So things like infrastructure, education, health, from thinking about what is required to meet the ESG standards that financial institutions and companies are setting for themselves. So communities' ability to access support, to participate in FPIC or consultation processes, and then to achieve access to remedy. I think those are two somewhat distinct things, or two distinct things. And on this question of, oftentimes we're thinking about setting up compliance mechanisms within operating companies and promoter companies, and that is very critical and needs to be there. And I know that the bank has a large number of things that you do with companies looking at those environmental and social governance standards and compliance mechanisms. The thing that I would say, or that I'm proposing, is really thinking about from the community's perspective what's needed as well to be an empowered counterparty. And I think just in the ESG processes that the bank is going through with your clients and portfolio companies would be really asking them to earmark a small amount of funding that would go towards those costs for community support. And that wouldn't necessarily be the bank contributing that directly, but just requiring companies to set aside a small amount of project budget to ensure that communities can access expert support, to participate in consultations, to use grievance redress mechanisms if they need them. And I think that probably has a different set of channels operationally in terms of where that shows up in financial, in loan agreements, and then in financial transactions than, say, a trust fund for community development. So just wanted to offer that for what it's worth. This is some of what we've been hearing from other DFIs that we've talked to as they think through what it takes to really implement the ESG standards they've committed to and how it can show up in their interactions with portfolio companies.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. A question from Kambo. Kambo, if you're talking about the pillars of the business and human rights guiding principles, the first one is the state duty to protect human rights. And the second one is on corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And the third is on access to effective remedy for the communities. Any other question? I don't see Reuters. I think he left, Claude, so maybe we might have to just seek some information from him directly. As we wrap up, any other reflections, comments from the panelists. I'll give you half a second from both panels just to give us your concluding remarks. And just very briefly, please don't use this opportunity to make the part of the presentation that you were not able to if I cut you. So I'll take a round. Norman, do you want to say something as we end? Dimas, do you want to say something? Jean-Pierre? Okay, I don't know if it's about the mics or William? Okay, Fred?
Yeah, maybe just to say thank you to the organizers, because this is a topic that is relevant, and empowering communities is indeed one of the foundations that will lead to improvement of life for the people of Africa. So this is the right trend. Let's push it, and let's use mining in the communities as one of the enablers to improve the quality of life for our people. And the social license is indeed something that can be achieved through these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Erin?
I would just echo Fred's thank you to everyone for the reflections and time today, and then this commitment to really doing what it takes to bring meaningful community participation to life in practice. So thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed and appreciated the reflections today.
Thank you, Erin. This has been a very interesting discussion. That was brought, that has shown us, at least from where I sit, I think it has shown us that it is possible to do good, to do better. And it pushes us to say, what is it that we must do so that we get to the win-win scenario, win-win relationship between the different parties, whether it's the government, the communities, and the mining companies. And how do we then use this best practice cases to motivate for that, to bring on board those companies that are still outside? There are some that are outside and actually want to learn and come on board. And there are some that are hesitant, that we can also use some of these best practices to bring them on board. So I think all these examples were very positive in terms of showing us what can be done, and the issue is how we use them moving forward. The discussion continues, it doesn't end here, and we hope that we can count on you guys here to participate at different levels. And there's also the issue that I mentioned earlier of those who may be interested in exploring this issue further, of sitting in a working group that will brainstorm on and come up with some recommendations on how best practices can be developed and how we can, as SAWA, we can engage more mining companies to come on board. I will not go through summarizing all the issues that were raised from the different case studies. I'll ask Claude to come in and say a few key points as he wraps up. But as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a study that is ongoing, and what we have is a draft, and what we would like is to have more comments and more input and more analysis as part of the feedback, so that this can be incorporated into the final study to make sure that we have a good product that we can confidently go out there and use as we advance our advocacy and initiatives on motivating the case, presenting the case for business to be more involved through financing development programs and projects to promote human rights and community participation in the areas and countries that they are operating in. The one last comment from Tabi Lang, great lessons learned as we embed human rights across our business value chain. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the report and presentations. And Tabi Lang, I know that you are here because we know that we can count on you to be part of this process, and also to share your experiences and recommendations on how this can move forward. But also, hopefully next time you will be able to share with us what Asibanye is doing. So my point is this conversation is continuing, and let's continue to come together as we move forward. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, behind the scenes. Thank you, Sawat. And with that, I will thank myself too in the process and hand over to Dr. Claude Kabemba to wrap up for us. Claude.
Thank you very much. More blessings for this moderation, which went very well. It's thank you to all those who came, who participated. We wanted not a big group, we wanted a small, so that we engage, so that we identify critical issues and the way forward. This is an area which is new in terms of thinking. We want to develop it further, and this is just the first phase where we are reviewing the report and starting to discuss the issues deeply to ensure that we understand exactly what can be done to improve the lives of the people. And I want to agree with Fred that mining extractive industry is the biggest economy on the continent. It has to contribute, but there are so many problems with communities. Access to remedies becomes critical. Human rights issues are part of development. So we will continue to engage, and we will communicate the second phase of the project, and we'll continue. It's we just said the beginning, and we look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. Thank you so much. More blessings.
Thank you, Claude. I like this discourse because we have sat for too long with the narrative and discourse that mining companies are bad. They're very bad people in Tavilang. That mining companies are all very bad people. We shouldn't engage them. But why don't we use what we have and those coalition of the willing, the mining companies that are willing and available, and move forward and actually make what was it that Rohit said, make it look attractive, showcase what is good and showcase what good looks like. So let's do that in Tavilang as we move forward, so that we change the narrative on the ground that mining companies are bad. They just want profit and extract profit and go away and leave the people poor. Let the communities see for themselves some of those benefits remaining in their lives in a sustainable way, so that they can value these companies in a different way. But I think, Claude, also, I think we need to have a holistic approach to this. I think we need to bring the government conversation in, because there needs to be a good link. I think this is what part of what you were saying, William, that there needs to be alignment, a good link between the government and the companies and us, and especially in terms of making sure that the guiding principles are well aligned, are well implemented, because it won't help much if only the companies are running with it and the governments are not on board. So let's have a more holistic approach to this, so that it's more sustainable and more beneficial. With that, I think, guys, it was good having you here. Thank you very much for your participation. Bye, everybody. You can put on your camera and say bye. If you can, we want to see you. You can wave at us. Wave, 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 wave. Fred, wave. Claude, wave. Erin. Madam Veronica, please wave at us. Yes.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. Okay, nice. It's nice to. A lot of times I felt like I'm speaking to a wall. Where are these people? I just see their names and not their faces. So I'm comforted as I leave this to see your faces, that you actually exist. Have a good day and take care. Be safe. And get vaccinated.
Bye. Have a great day yourself.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for the excellent moderation.
Thank you, my
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good day.